The cleaning lady didn't expect anyone to notice her at the gala. But when the millionaire host stopped the music and pointed right at her, no one could believe what he said. Before we begin, comment which country you're watching from. And don't forget to rate this story from 1 to 10. Enjoy the story. Lena had cleaned that ballroom 100 times before, but never with this much noise, this much perfume, or this many heels taller than her confidence. She had been called in last minute, not to attend the gala, of course, but to support operations, which was corporate language for wiping the invisible while being treated, like you were made of glass and dirt at the same time. Her uniform didn't fit quite right anymore. The name tag dangled sideways, and the only thing she could really hold on to was the tray in her hands, which carried a glass of untouched champagne and a tiny stack of cocktail napkins no one would ever use. The Grand Bellevue Hotel ballroom looked like it had been dipped in gold. Every corner sparkled, every table centerpiece glowed, and the people looked like they'd all just walked out of a high-budget drama set. Lena tried to stay invisible. She was good at that. She moved behind the tables, stuck to shadows, and kept her eyes low. Her job was simple: serve quietly, disappear quickly, and under no circumstance make a scene. But then something shifted. It always does, doesn't it? As she maneuvered past the dessert table, another staff member clearly overwhelmed, brushed past her too fast, cutting her off and nudging her elbow just enough to jolt the tray in her grip. The champagne glass tilted dangerously. A single drop leapt over the rim, caught the edge of a candlelight, and sparkled before landing silently on the edge of the linen. Lena caught her breath, steadied the tray, and forced herself not to look panicked. But someone had noticed. A woman in a deep red dress, diamonds around her neck and judgment in her eyes, glanced over and then whispered something sharp to the man beside her. He nodded, then glanced at Lena the same way someone might look at a stain on marble. "Why is she even on the floor?" the woman said, just loud enough. Lena turned away, ready to head back toward the kitchen where she could blend into the metal and steam and not feel like every inch of her skin was made of glass. Then the music stopped. Not gradually. It wasn't the kind of polite fade out that signaled a speech or announcement. It stopped like a record being yanked off a player sudden, loud in its silence and alarming. Every head turned toward the front of the room. Standing at the center of it all, elevated just slightly above the sea of donors, executives, and high society regulars, was Mr. Donahue. He wasn't holding a glass. He wasn't even smiling. He was looking straight ahead, with a seriousness that didn't match the mood of the night, and then he raised his arm and pointed. Right at her. Lena froze in place. She didn't react because she honestly wasn't sure he was pointing at her. It didn't make sense. No one pointed at her. People avoided eye contact. They walked around her, not toward her, but there was no one else in that direction. Whispers started to ripple. Did she spill something? Is she being fired in public? Security? But Mr. Donahue didn't break his stare. He stepped down from the platform, calm and deliberate, as though he knew exactly what he was about to do and also that it would change the entire night. And Lena? She stood there, tray trembling slightly, heart climbing up her throat, and every single person in that room now watching the one person who wasn't supposed to be seen. Lena didn't move, not because she was frozen in fear, but because her mind was racing through every possible scenario where this moment wasn't real, where the man pointing at her had made a mistake or perhaps meant someone behind her, someone actually invited. But she turned just slightly and there was no one. Only her. Mr. Donahue had now stepped off the platform. His shoes echoed with intention, slow and sharp against the marble floors, louder than the whispers now swirling like smoke around the room. People stepped aside to let him pass, as if this wasn't the host of the gala, but some kind of storm walking in a tailored tux. Lena kept her eyes down because meeting his gaze felt dangerous. And yet, something in the way he walked deliberate, without hesitation, made her feel as if he already knew exactly who she was. He wasn't squinting or searching. He wasn't puzzled or curious, he was certain. And that certainty unsettled everyone in the room. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne food stepped back too quickly and nearly bumped into a table, but no one cared. Every eye was now on Lena. She felt exposed, her worn shoes, her faded name tag, her hair pulled back with a tie that had snapped once and been knotted back into place. And yet, he was still walking toward her, 10 feet away now. Then 5. When he stopped, Lena finally lifted her eyes just enough to meet his. And what she saw there wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Not the kind that says, I think I've seen you before. No, this was deeper. This was someone looking at a ghost from a life no one else in the room knew existed. Mr. Donahue didn't speak right away. He just looked at her. And in that silence, something shifted, not in the room, in her. Because she realized he didn't see a mistake. He saw her. The tray in her hands, once a shield, now felt like a spotlight. And everyone around them could feel it. This wasn't about a spilled drink. This wasn't about staff protocol. This was personal. Donahue stood still. He didn't extend a hand. He didn't offer a smile. But his eyes were locked on Lena like a man watching something collapse in slow motion, something he once built with his own hands. Lena tightened her grip on the tray, her knuckles whitening, but she didn't blink. She couldn't. Not when someone looked at her like they'd once owed her the world and lost the receipt. He took a breath. Then quietly, almost like the words weren't meant for the crowd, but for a version of himself no one else could see, he whispered, "It can't be you." The phrase didn't echo. It didn't need to. The silence in the ballroom carried it farther than any microphone could. A woman in a red dress whispered to her husband. A young influencer paused her selfie video, lowering her phone like it was suddenly too heavy. But Lena, she didn't move. She didn't speak. Because hearing that voice, his voice say those words, it cracked something, not loud, not visible, but she felt it. Like a seam inside her had been stitched shut for years, and now, just slightly, it gave. Mr. Donahue took a step closer, eyes still fixed on her, and Lena instinctively stepped back. The tray finally wobbled. One glass tipped. A single drop of champagne landed on her wrist, cold and sticky, dragging her back into the present like a slap. Donahue noticed. He raised a hand, not to stop her, not to grab her, but like someone remembering a memory they'd tried to bury. "I knew someone," he said slowly, "a long time ago, who looked just like you." That's when Lena finally spoke. Her voice was steady, but her heart pounded like it was trying to outrun everything. Then she must be gone. And the room froze again, because it wasn't the answer anyone expected. But it was the truth she had lived. Donahue didn't flinch. If anything, her words landed like a slow burning fuse, not an explosion, but a quiet unraveling. She said, "Then she must be gone." But he heard, "I'm still standing, but not for you." He looked at her the way people look at closed doors in burning houses. Like if he stared long enough, maybe the door would open. Maybe time would show mercy. But Lena? She held that tray like a soldier grips a weapon, not because it offered protection, but because it gave her posture. She wouldn't break. Not in this room, not in front of him. "You were the smart one," Donahue finally said, the words strange in his own mouth. He wasn't talking to the cleaner. He wasn't talking to the staff. He was talking to her. The girl from a decade ago. The girl who used to argue with professors, not mop marble floors. Lena blinked slowly. The sound of glasses clinking in the background returned, faint, almost apologetic. "That girl died a long time ago," she said. But he shook his head. Once, twice, like trying to erase a bad dream. No. She just disappeared. That struck a nerve. The calm on Lena's face cracked not fully, just enough for her jaw to tighten, her lips to press hard together like she was swallowing an earthquake. "You don't get to say that," she said. "You're the one who erased her." A sharp inhale, and this time Donahue looked down. Because when someone you thought you'd never see again stands in front of you, not begging, not breaking, but telling you what you did, the weight doesn't land on them, it lands on you. And suddenly, for the first time all evening, Mr. Donahue looked like he didn't belong in his own gala. Donahue raised his eyes again, but this time there was no trace of arrogance, no remnants of the man who had once owned every room he entered. He stood there, surrounded by clinking glasses and artificial laughter, and yet it felt like the entire ballroom had shrunk down to just the two of them. Lena shifted her weight slightly, the tray still balanced perfectly, but her knuckles now looked as if they were carved from marble, pale, tense, unwavering. "I thought you left," Donahue said, almost too softly to be heard, yet Lena caught every syllable like a blade. She exhaled through her nose, but it wasn't a breath of relief, it was the kind of breath people take before deciding not to scream in public. "I waited," she replied, her voice steady and low. "You didn't." The silence that followed didn't ask for interpretation. It screamed of time wasted, of letters never answered, of promises made in the kind of nights people spend their whole lives trying to forget. Donahue looked stunned, not because of her words, but because of how calmly she delivered them, like someone who had lived through fire and no longer feared the smoke. He stepped closer, but the movement wasn't confident. It was the shuffle of a man walking through the debris of a memory he once boarded shut. "I was told, you'd moved on," he murmured. "That you went somewhere else, took a job, left it all behind." Lena didn't laugh, she didn't cry, but her eyes narrowed, not in anger, in disbelief, as if she just realized how easy it had been for him to accept her disappearance without asking a single question. "And you believe that?" she asked. "Just like that?" He didn't answer, because there's no defense for forgetting someone who waited. And in that moment, Donahue realized he hadn't just lost her. He had erased her. The hum of string music returned to Donahue's ears, but it felt distant, like it belonged to a world he had no access to anymore. Somewhere nearby, a waiter dropped a spoon and laughed nervously. But Donahue didn't look away from her, he couldn't. Lena didn't step back, nor did she try to soften her tone. She had waited too long to be understood in half sentences or hollow apologies. "Do you remember that elevator?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, not as a gesture of affection, but as a challenge. "The one that stopped between floors when the storm hit. You were the only one who didn't leave when the alarms went off." He blinked, slowly. "You told me you liked the quiet," she continued, voice level, unwavering. "Said it was the first time money had ever shut up long enough to let you breathe." Donahue's lips parted as if to say something, but he didn't, because that memory hadn't come to him in years, not until now. Not until her voice unearthed it like a time capsule left beneath guilt. "And you gave me your jacket," Lena added, almost as an afterthought. "You were terrified, but you laughed anyway." Donahue's hand moved, instinctively, toward the lapel of his tuxedo, as if searching for something long gone, not the jacket, but the boy he had been in it. "That was the night," he whispered. "The night I—" But he stopped. The words were too heavy for a sentence. They didn't want to be spoken. They wanted to stay buried under champagne and ambition. Lena nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Exactly," she said. "That was the night. And I guess it was also the last time you saw me as something more than a name on a forgotten resume." People had started to notice now. The host of the gala, the untouchable Mr. Donahue, was speaking to a cleaner as if he owed her the world. And the cleaner? She wasn't flinching, she wasn't backing away. She looked like the only person in the room who wasn't afraid of him. Because when the ghosts of the past walk into a ballroom, they don't wait for an invitation. They just look you in the eye and remember what you forgot. A woman in a green velvet dress leaned toward her husband, her diamonds catching the chandelier light like polished teeth. "Who is she?" she whispered, eyebrows arched. "Why is Donahue speaking to the help?" The man shrugged, uninterested, but others began to watch. Not with curiosity, with tension. Because when a man like Donahue freezes mid-conversation and forgets his own speech, people notice. Across the room, the PR manager clutched her clipboard tighter. The CEO of 6 hotels across the coast was now locked in a silent standoff with someone who carried a spray bottle on her belt. And Lena knew. She knew the stares, the whispers, the glances bouncing off her cheap shoes like pebbles off a statue. But she didn't shrink. She stood tall, not proud, not angry, just certain. Because truth doesn't always need a podium. Sometimes it just needs a pair of tired eyes that won't look away. "Lena," Donahue said again, softer now. Where did you go after? He trailed off. Because the answer was never going to be kind. After you ghosted me in your father's lobby? She finished for him dryly. I went looking for the job you promised. The one you said you'd take care of? I went back. I asked. They laughed. She didn't spit venom. That would have been easier. She told the story like someone recounting the weather on the day they got stranded. Factual, cruel only by the weight of its accuracy. No one returned my calls. No one even knew my name. Donahue pressed 2 fingers to his temple, like the memory physically hurt. Not because he meant to forget her, but because he hadn't remembered her at all. That's what guilt feels like, not fire, but absence. And now, Lena's voice wasn't the only sound in the room. Murmurs stirred, cameras turned, assistants took mental notes, but Lena, she didn't flinch. She wasn't here for spectacle. She was here for closure. You were the last person I trusted, she said. And you disappeared. Not with malice, just ... with money. And with that, the weight in the ballroom shifted. This was no longer about spilled wine or social standing. This was about the quiet, aching space between who people think they are and who they leave behind to become it. It wasn't the kind of story Lena wanted to tell in a ballroom full of silk and champagne. But sometimes the truth doesn't ask for permission, it just breaks through the cracks. She stared past Donahue's shoulder, eyes unfocused now, as if searching the wall behind him for something that once meant home. I stayed in the city, she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. Rented a room the size of a walk-in closet. 4 roommates, 1 heater, no lock. Donahue didn't interrupt. He looked like he was trying to breathe without making noise. Every day, I walked to the same office. Not to work, just to ask. Just to remind them I existed. But they didn't remember. They had no file. No name on record. Not even a rejection letter. The first few months had been the worst. There were nights she'd sit on the apartment floor, too proud to cry in front of strangers, too tired to even think about going home, because home no longer meant safety. It meant failure. Eventually, I stopped asking, Lena continued. I took whatever work came, hotel laundry, cleaning rooms after business trips, scrubbing tile while guests asked if I spoke English. Donahue winced, not dramatically. It was the quiet recoil of a man realizing he had once been someone's world and walked away without even looking back. I started cleaning the GALA floors 2 years ago. People stepped over me without seeing me. I listened to speeches about success and resilience ... while removing lipstick from the mirrors. Lena smiled. Not bitterly, just ... tired. It was the smile of someone who had carried her own weight for too long and had learned how to keep moving even when no one clapped at the finish line. I didn't need you to fix everything, she said softly. I just needed you to notice. And maybe that was the worst part. Not that Donahue had hurt her, but that he had done it so easily and remembered so little. A woman in a dark gray suit approached from the side, heels clicking faster than usual, the polite tension of corporate urgency written all over her face. Mr. Donahue, she said under her breath, we're scheduled to begin your speech in 3 minutes. The press is waiting. He didn't even blink. His eyes were still on Lena, still locked on something far heavier than time or headlines. Sir, she repeated, more firmly now, leaning in. This ... situation is becoming visible. Lena turned her head slightly. That word situation wasn't lost on her. She'd been called worse. But it always meant the same thing. You don't belong here, and your pain is an inconvenience. Is this about optics? Lena asked calmly. Or do you actually want to know why I never reached back out after your company forgot me? The assistant opened her mouth but found no good answer. She looked at Donahue like he might still salvage the moment with a laugh or a handshake. But he didn't. She worked for us? The assistant whispered. Donahue nodded once. No pride, no denial. Just a man admitting, finally, that a system he helped build had its cracks, and that she fell through them. And we forgot her? We didn't even see her, he said. That's worse. Around them, the GALA crowd shifted again. It wasn't a murmur anymore. It was full attention, phones down, eyes forward, because something rare was happening. A powerful man wasn't denying. He was listening. "I'll postpone the speech," he said quietly. "Lena deserves the floor." The assistant looked panicked. "You want her to address the guests, sir? That's exactly what I want." The air snapped like static. The pianist missed a note. A server dropped a fork. And Lena? She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded as if to say, "Finally." Lena stepped forward slowly. No spotlight followed. No host introduced her. Just the faint hum of air conditioning and a room holding its breath. She stood before a crowd dressed in satin and silk, crystal flutes still half full in their hands, and she wasn't nervous. Because what she was about to say had been said before, just never aloud. "I've been to this ballroom before," she began. "But back then, I was the one sweeping the confetti after your applause faded." A soft rustle swept the room. "I know how many of you celebrate resilience. You post about it, you raise toasts to it. But when resilience looks like someone in a cleaning uniform, you look away. A pause, not for drama, for breath. The kind she once didn't have time to take during double shifts. You congratulate ambition, but you reward connections. You praise hard work, but only when it comes with the right surname." Somewhere near the front, a man in a boatie lowered his glass. "I once cleaned a hotel room that belonged to one of you. You spilled wine on a letter of rejection, the same one I had received 2 weeks before. You laughed about it. Said it was too kind." Now Lena's eyes scanned the crowd, not accusing, but recognizing. "I didn't come here for pity. I came here because the man who invited me used to see me, and then he forgot." Donahue's face didn't move. "I'm not the only one. There are thousands. Maybe millions. You see our hands, but not our eyes. You see our labor, but not our names." She stepped back, not in fear, but to let the echo of her words breathe before the next glass clinked or the next excuse was whispered. "I'm not asking for a second chance," she said. "I'm asking you to remember who cleaned up after your first." Silence, not discomfort. Respect, even if some weren't ready to admit it yet. Donahue stepped forward as Lena returned to her corner, not to hide, but to make space for others to fill it with something better than silence. "Lena," he said, not from a podium, not behind a mic, just from the floor like everyone else. "You were never supposed to be invisible." She didn't respond. He glanced at the guests, all trying hard not to be seen watching. "We hire people like you," he continued. "We benefit from you, we talk about you, but we never talk to you. That ends now." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded letter. Not a check, not a press release, but something older. "This," he said, "is the internship letter you applied for 16 years ago." Gasps. Some genuine, some performative. "I read it," he said. "Back then, I thought it was ... sweet, too personal, too idealistic. I didn't think you could handle the pressure." He looked up, voice more fragile now. "Turns out you handled more than I ever did." Lena's eyes narrowed slightly, not with bitterness, but with careful expectation. "If you're willing," he said slowly, "we have a leadership fellowship. Full autonomy, full platform. You'd be shaping the future hires, the culture, the vision." A murmur ran through the gala. Was this guilt? PR? A stunt? Lena stepped forward again. But her answer was not what they expected. "I didn't speak tonight to get a job," she said. "I spoke because too many girls like me stopped speaking altogether." She looked around, then back at him. "But if you're serious, then don't offer me the room. Come back with me to where you left me out." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "Let's revisit the janitor's closet. Let's sit through the 3 a.m. shift. Let's rebuild it from there." Now it wasn't just applause she rejected, it was shortcuts. Because this wasn't about being elevated. It was about lifting the entire floor. The ballroom, once humming with orchestrated elegance and curated applause, now sat under a heavy silence that made every chandelier seem to flicker under the weight of its own reflection. What had begun as a seamless evening of status and spectacle had turned into something no one had rehearsed for, an unfiltered confrontation between appearance and truth, privilege and proximity. Donahue stood still, shoulders no longer squared with the confidence of a man who had controlled every room he'd ever walked into. His hands, which once signed mergers and dismissed entire departments with a pen stroke, now hung uncertainly at his sides, unsure whether to offer an apology or simply remain still enough not to make anything worse. He had offered Lena a platform, but what she gave back was a demand, not for power, not for position, but for memory, for accountability, for a walk through the very spaces where her voice had once been erased. Lena, for her part, wasn't trembling, not anymore. If anything, the tension in her spine had given way to something far more dangerous: clarity. She had spent a lifetime shrinking herself to fit into corners others ignored, cleaning up their mistakes, their messes, their parties. And now, in front of the very people who had never asked for her name, she spoke like someone who remembered every inch of the building better than they ever had. "You want to help," she said, her voice low but sharp enough to carry. "Then don't start here, with the lights and the cameras and the speeches. Start in the hallway where I stood for 7 hours because I wasn't allowed to sit during my shift. Start in the kitchen where I overheard your board laughing about how hiring people like me was good optics. Start in the closet where I kept my extra pair of shoes because my solace wore out too fast to last a week." A man in a tuxedo shifted awkwardly near the back of the room. A woman clutched her champagne glass like it might shield her from the heat rising off the truth. Donahue didn't move. He wasn't just listening, he was being reassembled. "You said I was never supposed to be invisible," Lena continued. "But I didn't disappear. You just never looked." There was no anger in her tone anymore. That had burned out years ago. What remained was a kind of quiet, contained devastation, the kind that builds when dignity is stolen one unnoticed moment at a time. She took a breath, not because she was done, but because she had earned the space to breathe on her own terms. "This isn't about you giving me something now," she said. "It's about you finally seeing what you took." Someone finally clapped, hesitant, then another, then silence again. Because this wasn't the kind of story that ended with applause. Donahue stepped forward slowly, like a man who didn't yet know if he was invited to walk alongside the truth he'd ignored. "Can I join you?" he asked, voice nearly inaudible. Lena didn't answer immediately. She let the question hang there, not as a door to be opened, but as a weight to be carried. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't just to him. "You can walk, but I won't wait." The crowd had scattered, not in panic, but in that slow, uncertain drift people adopt when they've seen something they can't quite name, yet know will stay with them longer than they expected. What was once a celebration had become a reckoning, and the air still carried the charge of something left unresolved. Outside, the night had fallen into a kind of hush, the hotel's grand entrance glowing in warm amber lights. Donahue stood near the valet, his tuxedo slightly rumpled, eyes fixed on a limousine he had no intention of entering. For once, he wasn't being driven away from the uncomfortable. He was standing still in it. Lena didn't walk out like someone who had just made a statement. She stepped into the night like someone who had finally stopped asking permission to exist. Her uniform was the same, her hair still tied back, but something fundamental had shifted, not in how she looked, but in how she was seen. She passed Donahue without a word, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Some things once spoken don't need repeating. And for the first time in years, she wasn't walking out of a room as a ghost in someone else's story. She was walking into her own. But just as she reached the curb, he called out, "Lena." One word, her name, no titles, no roles. No apologies wrapped in corporate polish. Just her name, spoken like it meant something now. She paused, her back still turned, and for a moment he thought she might say something, that maybe he'd earned a second look. But she didn't, because this wasn't about him. She stepped forward, down the steps, into the streetlight. And as the limousine pulled away behind her, it was clear he would leave that night with everything he thought he owned. Except her forgiveness. And Lena, she didn't need a ride. She had her own way home.